The year is 2034. A law student sits in a library. The room is quiet. Sunlight cuts through the tall windows. It illuminates dust motes dancing in the air. Her name is Maya. She is studying contract law, specifically end-user license agreements. The case file on her screen is dense. Jenkins versus Deere and Company. Decided in 2028. It is a landmark right-to-repair case, a foundational text for her generation of lawyers. She scrolls through pages of technical arguments, code, proprietary software, digital locks. Then she reaches Appendix B, a list of evidence submitted by the plaintiff. Exhibit A, a diagnostic report from a Deere S780 combine. Exhibit B, a locked engine control unit. Exhibit C, a bill for $9,000. Then she sees Exhibit D. She stops scrolling. She leans closer to the screen. Exhibit D, Operator's Manual, 1972, International Harvester Farmall 915. A footnote clarifies. The manual was submitted to demonstrate a reasonable expectation of ownership. Maya frowns. A 1972 Farmall. In a case about encrypted software on a 2023 combine. It made no sense, an old piece of iron in a digital fight. She clicks a link in the footnote. It takes her to the trial transcripts. The opening statement from the plaintiff's lawyer. He wasn't talking about code. He wasn't talking about warranties. He was telling a story. A story about a woman, a storm, and a machine that everyone thought was history. This channel tells the stories nobody else is telling. The stories about the lines we draw in the dirt, and the people who refuse to be told where they can stand. If you believe in those stories, subscribe now, because you need to hear about Sarah Jenkins and what happened in the fall of 2023. The story starts not with a lawsuit, but with the sky. It was turning that particular shade of bruised purple, the kind of sky that promises rain. Not a gentle rain, a harvest-ending rain. Sarah Jenkins stood in a field of soybeans. The pods were dry, perfect, ready. She had maybe 2 days, 48 hours to get 500 acres in. It was the family farm. Her grandfather had bought the first parcel in 1952. Her father had doubled it in the 80s. Now it was hers. The land was her inheritance. The debt was hers too. And sitting in the middle of that field was the biggest piece of that debt. A John Deere S780 combine. It was a monster, a beautiful green technological marvel. Air-conditioned cab, GPS auto steer, yield monitors that sent data to the cloud. It cost more than her grandfather's entire farm. And right now, it was completely silent. An error code had flashed on the screen. ECU authorization failure. Then the engine shut down. Not a mechanical failure, not a sputter, just a clean, decisive digital death. A machine worth $500,000 was now a statue in a field of ripening beans. She had already called the dealership. They were sending a tech. She checked her watch. She looked at the sky. Every minute was costing her money. Every minute was a victory for the coming storm. A white truck pulled up the service lane. Frank Miller got out. He was wearing a green John Deere polo shirt. He was not a stranger. Frank had been the Deere tech for 15 years. He'd known her father for 20. He coached her younger brother's little league team. He was a good man, a pillar of the community. He served on the church council. This was the gatekeeper rule in action. The person who tells you no is rarely a monster. They are often kind. They are often certain. And certainty is more dangerous than cruelty. Frank gave a sympathetic smile. Let's see what we've got, Sarah. He didn't open a toolbox. He opened a laptop. He plugged a cable into a port below the steering column. His face was grim. He tapped on the keyboard. He shook his head. Well, here's the problem. He turned the screen toward her. The diagnostic software showed the error. The ECU has been locked. Locked? What does that mean? It means the machine's brain is bricked. It's a security protocol. The system detected an unauthorized diagnostic tool. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. The independent mechanic. 2 weeks ago, a sensor had failed. The dealership said it was a 3-day wait. She couldn't wait. So she called a local guy, an old-timer named Gus. He'd fixed it in an hour. He must have plugged his own reader in. She told Frank this. He nodded slowly. He understood. But understanding didn't change the situation. Look, Sarah, I get it. You were in a bind. But Deere's policy is absolute. An unauthorized connection triggers a system-wide lockdown. It's to protect the integrity of the machine, to protect you from improper repairs, to protect your warranty. He was saying the word protect a lot. It didn't feel like protection. It felt like a cage. So unlock it, she said. Frank sighed. That's the thing. I can't. This isn't a password I can just reset. The lock is permanent. The ECU has to be replaced. The room went silent, but they were standing in a field. The wind rustled the dry soybean leaves. It sounded like whispering. How long will that take? Frank winced. He didn't want to say the next part. I have to order it from the factory in Moline. With shipping and installation, you're looking at 2 weeks, maybe 3. 3 weeks. Sarah looked at the sky. The bruised purple was getting darker. In 3 weeks, these beans would be rotten on the stalk. Her whole year's profit, gone. Frank, there has to be another way. There has to be a bypass, a workaround. He shook his head. The certainty was back in his eyes. I've been doing this for 15 years. There is no other way. This is the system now. I'm not going to be the man who lets you lose your crop, Sarah. But my hands are tied. It's for your own good. It's for your protection. He genuinely believed it. He believed he was helping her. He was protecting her from herself. That is the most dangerous limitation, the one imposed by someone who thinks they are being kind. It cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven, and that takes time. Time she didn't have. He packed up his laptop. I'll put the order in right away. He said it with a tone of finality. He got in his truck and drove away, leaving Sarah alone, with a $500,000 paperweight and a sky that was about to break its promise. She walked back to the farmhouse, the place her grandfather had built with his own hands. The screen door creaked. Her father, Michael, was at the kitchen table. He was 75. His hands were gnarled from a lifetime of work. He'd seen droughts, floods, a fire in '88. He'd seen it all. He looked at her face. He didn't need to ask. He just poured her a cup of coffee. She told him what Frank had said. 3 weeks. For your own protection. My hands are tied. Michael listened. He stared out the window. His gaze was fixed on the old machine shed at the back of the property. The one with the faded red paint and the sagging roof. He was silent for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. Each tick was a countdown to the rain. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it was heavy, like a stone. When the bank took your grandfather's first farm back in '49, they took everything. The house, the barn, the livestock. They took it all. He looked at his daughter. Everything except the dirt. The dirt was all he had left. He came here with nothing but the clothes on his back, and the deed to this piece of ground. He turned his gaze back to the old shed. He left us the dirt, and he left us the iron. The dirt is enough. The iron is ours. It wasn't a speech. It was a statement of fact, a philosophy. Sarah looked at her father. Then she looked out the window at the shed, and she understood. She walked out the back door. Her father followed. They didn't speak. They walked to the old machine shed. The big doors groaned on rusty hinges. The air inside was thick with the smell of history. Old oil. Decades of dust. Mouse nests. In the back, under a heavy canvas tarp, was a shape. A ghost from another time. Sarah pulled the tarp. Dust billowed in the dim light. There it sat. A 1972 International Harvester Farmall 915. Her grandfather's combine. It was a relic. No GPS, no air conditioning, no computer. Just steel and belts and hydraulic hoses. It hadn't run in 12 years. The tires were flat. The paint was faded to a pale, rusty pink. A bird had built a nest in the engine compartment. Her father ran his hand along a dusty fender. He bought it new in the fall of '72, paid for it in cash. He never borrowed money for equipment again. Not once. He said a man should own his tools, or the tools own the man. Sarah looked at the machine. It was impossible. The batteries were dead. The belts were cracked. The fuel in the tank had turned to varnish. But then she looked at her father, and she saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't nostalgia. It was knowledge. He knew this machine. Every bolt, every grease fitting, every wire. He had kept it running for 30 years. "Let's get to work," he said. The next 48 hours were a blur. It was a resurrection. They dragged the old beast out of the shed with a tractor. First, the engine. They pulled the old batteries. They were swollen and useless. They took the batteries from Michael's old pickup truck. The cables were too short. Sarah found old jumper cables and spliced them together, black electrical tape holding the connection tight. They drained the fuel tank. A thick brown sludge came out. It smelled like poison. They spent 2 hours cleaning it, scraping the varnish from the inside. They replaced the fuel filter. Michael had 3 of them, still in their original boxes on a shelf. Part number 384598-R92. He knew it from memory. The belts were a nightmare, cracked and brittle. They broke as soon as they tried to turn the engine. They didn't have replacements, nowhere to get them in time. So they improvised. They drove to the abandoned parts combine at the edge of the woods. A donor machine her grandfather had bought for scrap in '95. They scavenged what they could. A hydraulic pump. 2 belts that looked almost right. One was an inch too long. Michael showed her how to drill a new tensioner hole, to take up the slack. They worked under floodlights through the night. The air grew cold. Coffee kept them going. Her father didn't move fast, but his hands were sure. He would point. That one. No, the 9/16. He knew the feel of every nut and bolt. Sarah's hands were scraped and bleeding. Grease was ground into her skin, under her fingernails. But she felt something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about fixing a machine. It was about remembering. Remembering a different way of doing things. A way that didn't require a laptop, or a password, or permission. Have you ever had to fall back on something old to solve a new problem? Something everyone else thought was useless. A skill your grandfather taught you. An old tool in the bottom of a drawer. A piece of advice you'd long forgotten. Tell us about it in the comments below. Because what Sarah was harvesting wasn't just soybeans. It was a different kind of freedom. And she was just getting started. At dawn on the second day they were ready. The Farmall looked like a patient on life support. Wires bypassed, hoses patched with clamps. But it was whole. Sarah climbed into the cab. The seat was cracked vinyl. The controls were simple levers and gauges. No screens, no touchpads, just a key. She turned it. The starter groaned. A tired, painful sound. Nothing. "Try it again," her father called from the ground. "Give it a little ether." He sprayed a small amount into the air intake. She turned the key again. The engine coughed. A puff of black smoke shot from the exhaust stack. It coughed again. Then, a roar. The old diesel engine shuddered to life. It wasn't a smooth, quiet hum like the Deere. It was a violent, clattering, beautiful noise. The sound of independence. Sarah engaged the header. The old machine trembled, but it worked. She looked at her father. He was covered in grease, exhausted, and he was smiling. "The dirt is enough," he said. "The iron is ours." She drove the old Farmall toward the field. It was slow. It was loud. The cab was hot and dusty, but it was moving, and it was hers. Completely, totally hers. The neighbors saw it. They stopped their trucks on the county road to watch. A museum piece trundling into a modern field. The community split. You could hear the talk at the co-op, at the diner. Some were scornful, the community doubters. "She's crazy," one said. "That thing will break down every hour. She's losing yield just by using that old header." "It's sentimental nonsense," said another. "She should just cut her losses and wait for the part. She's letting pride get in the way of good business." Their words came from a place of logic, of modern efficiency. They sounded reasonable. But then there were the others, the old-timers, the ones who remembered. They saw the 915 and they didn't see a relic. They saw a symbol. Dale Anderson, the farmer from the next section over, pulled into her yard that afternoon. He was in his late 60s. He didn't offer advice. He didn't ask if she needed help. He just got out of his truck with 2 5-gallon cans of diesel and a toolbox. "My dad had one of these," he said. "The fuel pump gets finicky when it's hot. Figured you might need an extra hand." He didn't wait for an answer. He just started checking the hydraulic fluid levels. He was the ally, the one who shows up with tools, not opinions. That's how it went. The harvest was a battle, a slow, grinding war against time. Day 1. The sun rose. The engine turned over. The dust flew. She cut 30 acres. The Deere would have done 100 before lunch. The sun set. Day 2. A bearing on the header seized. It took them 3 hours to fix it. Dale knew a trick with a hammer and a punch. It worked. She cut 35 acres. The clouds on the horizon were darker. Frank Miller drove by, the Deere tech. He slowed his truck. He watched the old Farmall crawling through the field. A plume of dust and smoke behind it. He didn't stop. He didn't wave. He just watched for a long moment. The witness who watches. Then he drove on. Day 3. The engine started to overheat. Sarah realized the radiator was clogged with chaff. She spent an hour blowing it out with a leaf blower. She cut 40 acres. She was learning the machine's rhythm, its language of squeaks and groans. She was not an operator anymore. She was a mechanic, a partner. Day 4. She worked past midnight. The floodlights on the old combine were dim, but they were enough. She finished another 50 acres. Just 60 acres left. The wind picked up. It smelled like rain. The 5th day was the last stand. She started before dawn. Dale was there with coffee. Her father was there with wrenches. They didn't stop. They didn't eat. They just worked. The old machine groaned in protest. It was being pushed past its limits, past its intended life, but it did not quit. As the sun began to set, she cut the last row. She pulled the combine up to the grain bin, unloaded the last of the soybeans. Her entire harvest. Safe. She shut off the engine. The silence was deafening. She sat in the cab for a long time, just listening to the sound of the wind. And then, the first drop of rain hit the dusty windshield, followed by another, and another. The storm had arrived. It was 1 day late. A week later, the new ECU arrived from Moline. Frank Miller came to install it. He found Sarah in the workshop. She wasn't looking at spreadsheets. She wasn't on the phone with the grain elevator. She was on her hands and knees, methodically cleaning the grease and grime from the Farmall's engine block. Frank was quiet. He went to the new combine. He installed the part. He plugged in his laptop. He ran the diagnostics. Everything was green. He started the engine. It purred to life. A smooth, perfect digital hum. He came back to the workshop. He held out an invoice. The bill was for $9,212. $7,800 for the part, the rest for his 2 service calls. Sarah wiped her greasy hands on a rag. She took the piece of paper. She looked at it. She didn't get angry. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at Frank. A long, quiet, devastating look. This is the quiet devastation. The moment when work speaks louder than words. "Frank," she said. Her voice was steady. "How much does a wrench cost?" He looked confused. "I don't know, $20? She nodded. "And how much does it cost to own the thing you paid for?" He had no answer. He looked from the invoice in her hand to the massive, silent Deere outside, to the old, greasy Farmall in the workshop. He was a good man. He was just a certain man. And for the first time, his certainty was gone, replaced by something he couldn't quite name. Sarah slid another piece of paper across the workbench. It wasn't an invoice. It was a bill of sale. She had sold the Deere S780 to a corporate farm 3 counties over. The deal had closed that morning. "I don't need it anymore," she said. Frank looked at her, then at the old red combine. "But that thing is an antique. It's inefficient. You can't run a modern farm with that." He still thought he was protecting her. Sarah smiled, a tired, knowing smile. "You're right. I can't run the farm with just that one. So I bought 2 more just like it. And Dale is selling his big new case. He bought an old Steiger instead. We're starting a co-op. For farmers who want to own their own iron. We're going to teach repair workshops. For anyone who wants to learn." She picked up a wrench. "We're choosing the wrench, Frank, not the code. The dirt is enough. The iron is ours." Frank Miller stood there for a long time. He was on the wrong side of something important, and he finally knew it. That was the beginning, not the end. The story of the harvest spread, first through the county, then the state, then it went national. A farming journal wrote an article, "The Farmer Who Fought the Code." Her lawsuit, Jenkins versus Deere and Company, was filed a year later. It was not about money. She didn't sue for damages. She sued for the right to repair her own property. The legal battle lasted 4 years. It went all the way to the state Supreme Court. Deere's lawyers were brilliant. They talked about safety, about intellectual property, about environmental regulations. Sarah's lawyer told a story about a woman, a storm, and a 1972 Farmall. He submitted the operator's manual into evidence. He held it up for the judges to see. "This manual," he said, "doesn't contain warnings. It contains instructions. It assumes the owner is intelligent, capable, sovereign. That is the reasonable expectation of ownership." She didn't win, not outright. The court sided with Deere on the copyright issue, but the story was out. The idea was planted. Right to repair bills started appearing in state legislatures across the country, citing her case, telling her story. The co-op she started grew. They called it the Independent Iron Alliance. By 2030, it had over 200 members. They shared equipment. They stockpiled spare parts. They held workshops every winter, teaching young farmers how to weld, how to rebuild a diesel engine, how to read a hydraulic schematic. Generational knowledge. passed down like an inheritance, more valuable than any line of code. The legacy was not one woman's victory. It was a systemic shift, a small, stubborn rebellion against a future where you don't own anything you buy. Which brings us back to the present, to the Agricultural Museum in Sarah's hometown. It's a quiet place, filled with the tools that built this country: plows, tractors, planters. Sarah Jenkins is there. She's older now, her hair is gray, her hands are still the hands of a mechanic. She's not looking at the big exhibits. She's standing in front of a small glass case. Inside, there is no tractor, no combine, just a single object resting on a piece of black velvet. It's a steering wheel lock, a simple, custom-made device, a steel collar with a lever welded to it. The plaque next to it reads, "One-armed steering aid, circa 1965, fabricated by Michael Jenkins." Sarah's father had lost his left arm in a farming accident. He couldn't afford a new tractor with power steering, so he built this. A simple piece of iron that allowed him to steer with one hand. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't call a technician. He saw a problem, and he forged a solution. Sarah puts her hand on the glass. She closes her eyes. She remembers. The iron is ours. It was never about the combine. Not really. It was about this simple, powerful idea. The idea that you have the right to solve your own problems. It was never about one harvest. It was about a question we are all facing every single day. Who owns the tools you use to make a living? The phone in your pocket, the car you drive, the software on your computer. Who has the right to fix them? The person who buys them or the person who writes the code? Right now, somewhere in the world, a person is being told they can't, that their problem is too complex, that they need to wait for an expert, that they need to buy a new one, that the lockdown is for their own protection. They are being told that their hands are tied. Sarah Jenkins proved that they are not. You can choose the wrench. You can choose to own the iron. You can decide that the dirt is enough. If this story means something to you, subscribe to this channel. We tell the stories of the people who choose the wrench. Comment below with a time you had to fix something yourself, when everyone else told you it was impossible. And share this video with one person who needs to be reminded that they have the right to repair their own lives.